When it comes to power scaling, people like to use 4 main metrics to scale characters. And the metrics are feats, statements, narrative, and portrayal. And I did cover these 4 metrics in the video I made quite some time ago, but I've decided, you know what, why not I come back to it. And in this video, I'm going to be going over feats versus narrative, as I feel like those are the main 2 people like to argue over all the time. So strap in, because I'm going to get really in depth with this. But before I get into the video, if you guys like this type of content, you know what to do: like, subscribe, as I am consistent, and I mean it's a win-win for both of us. You guys show me love and support, and I'll obviously give it back with many videos. And whether it's One Piece, other animes in general, or just fiction, I will go there eventually, so be there when I go there. Anyway, I feel that's enough babbling out of me. Let's get into feats versus narrative and truly see which one is a better metric to scale by. To begin the video, I'm going to explain feats, then I'm going to go over narrative, and then I'm going to come to a conclusion in the end which one is better. To begin this section, we have feats, and feats is very self-explanatory and it's very easy to see since, well, it happens in front of your face on panel or just in the anime itself. Now, feats can also be measured by statements, and certain statements can give a character feats. For instance, Aokiji versus Akainu is a feat for both of them, as we are told, and it is confirmed that they did fight for 10 days, meaning that we can use those 10 days to measure their endurance and whatnot. Now, I know off of the explanation I just gave you, feats may seem very black and white, but they're not as black and white as you may think, and especially in a series like One Piece, they can be very grey at times. Now, I'm going to give you a few examples of feats that may sound impressive when you say it out loud, but when you actually look at the context, you're like, oh, they're impressive, but they're not as impressive as they may seem. Shiryu stabbing Garp, Smoker stalemating Ace, and Kid and Law being Big Mom. Now, out loud, it may seem very impressive, but when you actually look at the context surrounding these feats, they're not as impressive as they may seem. Now, if somebody were to tell you that Shiryu stabbed Garp and had Garp leaking, you'd be like, okay, alright, Shiryu's got some juice on him. But then when you actually look at the whole entire scene, you see that number 1, Shiryu had to sneak Garp, and number 2, Garp literally slammed him on his head the second after and went about his way. Mind you, this was with no haki or anything. And then you're kind of like, oh, that's why it happened. When you look at Smoker versus Ace in the bubble, it may seem like, oh, okay, Smoker still made Ace, and Ace is the second commander of the Yonko crew. Smoker must be second commander level. But then when you really look here, you're like, oh, it's just a battle of the devil fruits, and that is just a pre-time skip fight where there was no haki involved, there was no nothing involved, it was just straight devil fruits. And when you're like, okay, cool, what happened if they fought like 500 chapters later? Yeah, Ace was slammed Smoker on his head, but because it was a pre-time skip fight and there was no haki usage, it was just a straight battle of devil fruits. You're like, oh, okay. Now, Big Mom versus Kid and Law may seem a little better than the other 2, but when you really look at the whole scenario, you're kind of like, whoa, it's not as impressive as people like to hype it up to be. Number 1, Big Mom wasn't going all out. She didn't use any type of haki during their fight. And number 2, it was a ring out. They didn't actually beat her. She was still conscious and she was still ready to fight. It's just the fact that the bombs got to her, meaning she was pushed off of the island. They didn't actually defeat her themselves. And so now when you look back at those 3 feats, you're like, oh, okay, I get what you're saying now. It's not like as cut and dry as you may think, and that's why feats need to be looked into to where you can be like, okay, the authenticity of this feat is pretty good. Now, when you're scaling off of feats, there are many things that need to come into play to obviously make the feat stand out and look good. Number 1 is the statements behind the feat, so if there's any statements that hype up the attack or hype up whatever's going on, and it's portrayal behind the feat, so if that character is really strong or the attack has a certain portrayal, so it's like, okay, this is an attack that everybody has to move out of the way of. Now, the perfect example of this would be Zoro blocking the double Yonko attack, and I'm going to use this feat and I'm going to dissect it so all of you really understand how this feat works. Now, the portrayal behind the feat is huge. It's by 2 Yonko, like that's something that you need to worry about. But then obviously you have the statements, and the statements back it up even further where they're like, we need to dodge, we gotta go, like this is an attack that any of us can block. But as we know, Zoro jumps in the way and blocks the attack. Now, how long he blocks it for is very important, as when they are teleported after, Kid says, depending on the translation, it was a second or a moment. Now, what a lot of people like to do is they like to stretch this feat and say he blocked it for a long period of time or longer than how long it was stayed in the story. Yes, the feat is impressive. Blocking a double Yonko attack even for a second is a very, very impressive feat, especially since it was just with his base armament he did that. But with that being said, it isn't to the extent that many Zoro fans like to hype it up to be, meaning the feat isn't as great, but don't worry, the feat is still a great feat. It's one of the best feats in the series, I'd say. Another way you can scale feats is by comparing other characters' feats and then using those other characters to then upscale another character. The best way to explain it is with Sanji and Marco. Marco is able to blitz Queen, but he's still in his perception in his base. Now, Sanji later blitzes a hybrid Queen who we know is definitely faster than his base. And not only does he blitz Queen, he perception blitzes him, but what we need to make sure to understand is that Sanji doesn't even have any Janbeis on, and so he does that in his base. As you can see, what I've done is I've compared a feat against one character between two people and seen which one is better. That is one way you can use feats to power scale as well. Usually that is how people scale. Another way I could do this is Doflamingo and Cracker. Both Doflamingo and Cracker try to hit Luffy with sharp objects, but the difference between both of them is the fact that Luffy is cut by Cracker while Doflamingo can't cut Luffy. From this we are able to see who has better haki, and obviously as we can see, the one that has better haki is Cracker. And with that being said, I feel like that's the end of the feats section. I know that there are probably more things that I could go in depth with feats, but don't worry, I'll save that for the end when I'm actually comparing the two. So now we're going to move on to narrative. Now, narrative is very integral to scaling, as without it, a lot of things do fall apart, and I'm going to explain why. The reason narrative is so integral to stories, and especially battle shonen, is because the longer the story goes on, people want to see the main character get challenged. So if the competition stays stagnant or gets weaker, what is the point of us even viewing it? We're just going to see the main character win every single time, and that is something that we do not want to see. And so that's why with every single important battle shonen that's out there, or just even main fiction story that's out there, the competitors always get stronger. Why? It's because it makes a better story and it keeps us interested. In One Piece, there are many characters that get boosted by narrative, but the one character that we all look at when it comes to this is Crocodile. Crocodile lost to a pre-Skypiea Luffy, while in Marineford he's clashing with people like Mihawk and Doflamingo. It just doesn't really make sense. But with narrative scaling, Oda is able to say, oh well, I mean look, it's later on in the story, so he just gets massively stronger. And that's why narrative scaling is so integral to all these discussions and debates. It's because with narrative, we know that the longer we go on, the stronger the opposition is going to be. There is a reason why people can sit here and say, oh yeah, we know that Katakuri is stronger than Doflamingo, even before Katakuri even makes a move. We knew that he was going to fight Luffy, and then when he started fighting Luffy, he was like, yeah, definitely stronger than Doflamingo, doesn't even need to be explained. There's a reason why we can easily say that the certain characters that will appear later on in the story will be stronger than Kaido, is because, well, Kaido fought Luffy back in Wano and only fought Luffy when he just got Gear 5. We know that when the later characters down the line are going to fight him, we know that he's going to have better control over Gear 5 and his haki may improve, so yeah, they're going to be stronger than Kaido. Especially in a series like One Piece where new techniques get introduced all the time, like obviously haki with post time skip and whatnot, we know that when the story goes on, they're more likely that things are going to get revealed, meaning that characters later on in the story are going to be stronger than characters early on in the story. But the exact same way feats can be misconstrued, narrative can be misconstrued as well, and it doesn't mean that every single time we see a new opponent, they need to be stronger than the last. For instance, Lucci is not stronger than Enel. Enel would have fried Lucci if Lucci ever dared to come in his vicinity. The reason Enel lost wasn't because Luffy was stronger than him, it was because he was his worst enemy, and that was someone Enel wasn't prepared to fight. And then on top of that, because he was rattled by Luffy's appearance, he couldn't use his haki properly, so he lost. Things like this do exist in the One Piece verse, and I think that's something that we do need to take into consideration when we're talking about this. Most of the time, narrative is something that you should follow because, as I said with feats, it's right in front of your face, so you're able to just see, okay, natural progression. But then on top of that, with One Piece, especially with One Piece, there are certain matchups that we will get that will be like, okay, cool. They may not be as strong as the last opponent, but because they can do certain things different to the last opponent, we then need to sit back and be like, okay, this is something that the main character is going to struggle with. A great example of this would be Zoro vs Shiryu in the future. I do not believe that Shiryu is stronger than King, but the only reason being Shiryu will give Zoro a tougher fight than King is because Shiryu is a tactical fighter, meaning he'll make Zoro think more, and it's going to lead to Zoro awakening something. In raw strength, I believe he pales in comparison to King, but as I just said, he has different ways of attacking Zoro, and this will lead to Zoro to obviously change his fighting style and make one that can defeat Shiryu. Unlike with King, who King for Zoro is just kind of his regular fight. He has to figure out his opponent and then he deals with him. And with that being said, I feel like I've covered everything I need to cover for narrative for right now. So why don't we get into the comparisons and truly find out which means more to power scaling. Now with the feats and narrative argument, it just depends on how you view the story. And in my opinion, I view it one way and I'm going to explain that way. I see the story as until proven wrong, I believe that the next opponent we fight needs to be stronger than the last just because of story progression. And with that being said, yes, I do believe that narrative does beat feats, but don't worry, don't get angry just yet if you're on the feats side. I'm going to explain why narrative is better than feats. Narrative is the crutch of everything that we even talk about. With narrative, we are able to give portrayal, we're then able to then give feats, and in a way as well, you can also say give statements as well, since with the narrative, certain statements will be made. The reason I say feats can be created by narrative is because a thing like Kaido not killing Kinemon with that one attack is kind of like, bro, Kinemon should be dead from that, but he survives because the narrative wants him to survive, meaning the narrative gave Kinemon a feat. Another reason I say that narrative is better than feats is because it can give us portrayal. With a character coming later on down the line, we can also say they have greater portrayal than other characters, meaning that the narrative is supporting their portrayal, meaning yes, you do owe it to narrative for giving that person the portrayal, allowing you to scale them with that other person. It may sound like gibberish, but that's just how the story works. Like, one character can come out later, they have higher portrayal than someone, but the narrative gives them that portrayal because they came later. I hope that makes sense. Another reason we like to use narrative over feats is because yes, feats does give you the certain things to scale one character at a certain point in time, but we know that the narrative is supporting the other character. For instance, Blackbeard is supported by the narrative, so we're able to say yes, Blackbeard can be stronger than Kaido because later on he's going to fight a Luffy that is stronger, and we know that Blackbeard is probably going to push him to them lengths, so yes, Blackbeard is stronger than Kaido. The same thing goes on for Emu, and it could go on for Loki if Loki fights Luffy and it's an actual fight. But we do know there are certain conditions around narrative to where it's like, okay, cool, we may need to hold back on it, but for the most part, aside from like 2 or maybe even just 1 instance in the whole series, we're like, okay, cool, this one character should be stronger than the last, and it just continuously goes on. Another way to prove that narrative is over feats is because if we look at everybody's top 15 in One Piece, you cannot sit here and tell me that every character on that list has a feat. I know everybody has Mihawk in their top 15, but he hasn't done a single thing that's onto the level of even current Zoro right now, yet we do know because of narrative that Mihawk is stronger than Zoro. Every character has some sort of narrative implication in that top 15, and that is the reason they are there. Narrative implications are everything, and narrative implications give people portrayal, so that means that narrative naturally is going to be stronger than feats all of the time. The best way I'll use narrative and feats in conjunction with each other, if you want to argue that one is over the other, is I'd say that narrative can be debunked sometimes through feats, meaning that okay, one character may not do as well as another that came before them in the story and able to use their feats to be like, okay, well, this is what happened. That is the only time that you can say that narrative is weaker than feats. But aside from that, which rarely happens in these type of stories, especially shonen stories, yeah, we're gonna have to look at narrative as the way forward. So as a bonus, since I know a lot of people do like to hear these sort of things, I want to rank all 4 of them, since I did do this before, but I want to do it now and see, okay, which one is better, narrative, portrayal, feats, or statements. Personally, I like to take narrative over all of them, since narrative implications does give us every single last one of them, aside from, I don't know, statements. Maybe statements is the only one that's in like a grey area where it's like it doesn't really need narrative for it, but for statements we also do kind of need feats for it. But it's like with all of these 4 metrics, they all are woven into each other, and without one of them the others can't work. The only one that can really stand on its own is narrative. Aside from that, statements does need some sort of backing, since a statement, as we know, can be proven false with feats are shown or the portrayal just doesn't match up, and if the narrative doesn't really want to add up with it as well, statements can be torn to shreds. And now if you were to tell me which one would I choose between portrayal and statements, I do believe feats is 4th. 4th will always be feats, because the other 3 can work without feats even being a thing, since as I said before, look at everybody's top 15 list. Not everybody on that list has a feat. Like obviously there are people on there that have feats like Shanks and whatnot, but others like Mihawk and Dragon don't have feats yet. So it's between statements and portrayal, and portrayal obviously is boosted by statements and statements are boosted by portrayal. But personally, I would take portrayal than statements, since with portrayal we're able to see, okay, cool, this character is being portrayed as somebody strong, but also it could come from statements. So I feel like these two are tied. If you want to say one is above the other, like statements is above portrayal or portrayal is above statements, I don't really think I'll have like a massive disagreement with you. But I do think that portrayal and statements are kind of intertwined too much with each other. So yeah, I want to say that they're both tied. Maybe even statements just a little bit above portrayal. But I do think portrayal is something that people do need to look out for. But because it's fueled so much by statements and probably even feats and narrative, it's like, it could be 2, could be 3. I'm not really too bothered with it. But if I was to rank them, I would put narrative at 1, 2 and 3, statements and portrayal, whichever way you want to go. And then at 4th, we have feats. Yeah, that's the end of the video. I could have gone over the other 2 a little bit more, but I mean, look, listen, you guys wanted feats versus narrative, so I gave you feats versus narrative. I did cover the other 2 in like a longer video a time ago, and if I'd have covered it now, I'd have been pushing like 30 minutes, bro. But I mean, look, you guys wanted feats versus narrative, so I gave you feats versus narrative with like a little sprinkle one with the other 2 at the end. So you guys got it, since you guys asked for it. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, since I did enjoy making it, and I will be pushing out more content like this. As usual, I probably will be putting up a poll if I haven't thought of my next video, and I'll just be like, yeah, I like this idea. But I don't know, I think I will make a poll for my next video, so be on the lookout for that. Like and subscribe for that. Mainly subscribe for that, since obviously you'll get your notification, and turn the notification bell on. I forget to tell you guys to turn the notification bell on, but turn it on, since I mean, it'll notify you when I do certain things like making polls and whatnot. But yeah, I think that's enough of my rambling, so I'm gonna let you guys go. Also, thank you for 2K. Like, I love you guys for the support. I'm going a little bit quicker than I thought I would be, but yeah, keep it up, because if you guys keep it up, I'm gonna keep coming with these ideas. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. I love you all, and goodbye.